Good afternoon, attendees of the Staples Business Advantage Education Virtual Solutions Expo. My name is Matt Freeman, and I'm with Kimberly-Clark Professional. And today, it's my job to help us walk through some insights, tips, and tools to really help meet those new cleaning, hygiene, and PPE demands, not just from staff and students, but from parents as well. I do have some folks from our Kimberly-Clark team joining me today, and the goal is to get through our content in the next 45 minutes and allow some time for Q&A after. So from a rundown perspective, I'll start off the session and I'll talk a little bit about some cleaning and hygiene expectations in education from some surveys that we did really during the beginning of the pandemic in 2020. Next, we'll bring in Travis Letwin. He'll help us understand some of the challenges that we see with hand hygiene. I mean, hand hygiene is a critical component in keeping clean and safe. So he'll walk us through some of those challenges and, more importantly, some of the solutions that we think that can help. Next, we'll bring in Dr. Stephanie Martin. You've been hearing a lot about cleaning, sanitizing, and disinfecting. She'll help us walk through what those terms really mean and how they're different, and more importantly, give us some tools for those high touch surfaces that are certainly prevalent in an education market. And then finally, we'll bring in Chrissy Schertz. She's been instrumental in helping launch our mask and respirator business in North America. There's a lot of questions around the differences between masks and respirators. People sometimes use the terms interdependently, and there really are some differences. She'll help us walk through that and understand where to go from there. And again, if we can get through that in the next 45 minutes, I think we're in good shape. So to start, let's look at some research and figure out what those expectations are of people when they are ready to go back to school when restrictions ease. The study that I'm going to be referencing actually was greater than education. It covered various away from home segments and covered 512 people. Those 512 people were from both Canada and the US. And more specifically, when it comes to the specific education slides I'll speak to, the sample size there is 87. So good enough to give us a good idea of what people are expecting when they get back to school. So overall, the first thing we wanted to do was understand the level of concern people had when returning to different environments. And so on the left-hand side here, you have a number of those types of areas that people are going back to. And then in the lighter blue, we'll call it, those are folks who responded as somewhat concerned. And then the orange folks who were very concerned. And I don't think it's a surprise here that education is in the top 10, whether it's higher education, which actually ranked higher than K to 12. And then we look at the very concerned part, whether it's higher education or K to 12, ranking very, very high, really next to that between senior care and in large office buildings. So long and the short is I don't think there's any surprises here. People are concerned about going back to those areas that are away from home. So what we want to do now is figure out how we can help them when they get there. So what we'll do now is we'll dive a little bit deeper, more specific into K to 12 and then higher education. So the first thing we want to look at are, from a K to 12 perspective, what are some of the important signals that people are looking for when they go back to that K to 12 environment? And they're listed here as 1 to 4. And again, I don't think they're necessarily surprising when you think of how we work with people who are in K to 12. So the most important thing that they want to do is show people what the expectation is with strong visuals on what those procedures are and how to do things properly. So that's number one. Second is seeing employees actively cleaning. And I will tell you that that's a change. So prior to COVID, any kind of larger cleaning applications or jobs were done outside of either school hours or working hours in an office building setting because they didn't want to see that as being disruptive to the everyday and the task at hand. That's changed. People actually want to see that cleaning taking place so they can be reassured that it's clean and safe where they are. Now, how does that translate into amenities? That's a fancy word for what are the things people expect to see and have access to when they're there. Number one is touchless systems in the restroom. I would tell you that touchless systems, and so what I mean by touchless is kind of electronic, right? Automatic. You put your hands towards it, and the towel or the soap or the hand sanitizer automatically gets dispensed. Those were increasing in popularity, but nowhere near the pace that we saw last year and even this year. So a very strong number of what we're doing now is all on that touchless element, and that would not have necessarily been the case prior to COVID. And then you got the rundown there from 2 to 5, and those are all the products that, quite frankly, we were all scrambling to get into our schools, into our supply chains during the heart of COVID. So no surprises to see surface cleaning wet wipes for use, whether that's at a desk, whether that's in a lunchroom, or whether that's in larger halls or admin buildings. Hand sanitizing wipes, pump or hand sanitizer spray, and then finally antibac soap in the restroom. So taking away from this, number one, just making sure people know what the procedures are that you've got in place, making sure people are seen when they're cleaning, and then finally, when it comes to amenities, those touchless systems really are critical. So if we switch gears to higher education, a lot of the same concepts still continue to resonate, but there's one significant difference. So if you look at the number one thing, the number one important signal here is staff who are in those facilities, who are interacting with guests, whether it be a parent or whether it be a student, who are actually wearing the appropriate PPE. So we didn't see that in K-12, and I won't pretend to understand the reason why. I would hypothesize that PPE might make students nervous, but at the same point in time, it's front and center when it comes to adults being around as one of the key things. Second, that procedures, right? So they want to see those procedures posted. They want to know the right way to do things and how things are being done. And the rest, very, very similar to what we saw on the last slide. Now, again, how does that translate into the amenities, and more specifically, what people want to see? Number one, hand sanitizing wipes. People want to be able to control their own environment. Touchless systems, very similar to what we saw before. Surface and cleaning wet wipes for guest use. Again, very similar to what we saw before. But here's where it kind of starts to get interesting. Number 4 are paper disposable seat covers, right? And so that's something that we typically see a lot in an office building environment. It's one of the first times that I've seen it in higher education. The second thing is familiar and well-known hygiene brands. So I think one of the things that we saw during the pandemic is there was an influx of things like hand sanitizer, right? That kind of came from anywhere and everywhere. And there were actually quite a large number of recalls associated with a lot of that product. The same can be said for things like hand towels. So having a branded solution that people know what it is, where it came from, is important, right? It's something they know and can trust will do the job that they're expecting them to do. So again, from a K-12 or higher education perspective, I hope that gives you some idea of what people are looking for from a signals perspective, and then the amenities that go along with that. Now, I talked about how the study encapsulated 512 people. So when you boil everything down, regardless of the segment, so regardless of where they're going back to, whether it's a senior care home or an airport or a school, these are all some of those common trends that came out of that. So the first is 94% of folks are saying they're washing their hands and sanitizing their hands more than they used to. What that means for your school is you got to make sure that the systems you have, whether it's towels or it's soap, are really high capacity systems so it can meet that new demand. Second is observing cleaners. Again, those were tasks typically done outside of the working day or the teaching day, but people want to see that actively happening now during the day when they're there. Touchless, we talked about that. 9 in 10 people prefer it in the restrooms. And here's another big one. 8 out of 10 folks said that the condition of the restroom reflects how much the employee cares. But here's what we also heard is if the restroom isn't clean and it's something that I can see, how bad or how messy or how nasty is the stuff that I can't see, right? So that clean washroom is a signal that the whole property is being looked at properly. And then finally, about 2/3 of folks preferring paper towels over air dryers, and that's something that Travis will get into in our next session. All right. With that, let's transition to Travis Letwin. Travis is a marketing leader with Kimberly-Clark Professional. Travis, how long have you been with KC for?
I've been with Kimberly-Clark for 8 blissful years.
Blissful years. I love it. And so, what Travis is going to do now is help us understand some of the challenges around hand hygiene, because we know how important hand hygiene is this day and age, well, any day and age, and also some tips and tricks to make sure that we're making the best of that soap and hand towels when we do, in fact, have them.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Matt. Appreciate the time very much. And I would like to reiterate, a lot of the points that Matt was going through, talking about, that it's a universal truth that people understand washing your hands is important. Washing your hands is important in removing germs, and realistically staying healthy. The only issue with that is a lot of our decisions are made unconsciously. Actually, 95% of our decisions every single day are made unconsciously. And I usually like to use the example of the tying your shoe. You just do it. You don't think about how you're doing it. In reality, you just do it. And that's very similar to look at when we wash our hands. It's a habitual process that we do unconsciously. So although we know it's important, we do it without thinking about what we should be doing or how we do it, which leads us to the reality that most of us don't do it properly. And actually, 95% of adults don't wash their hands long enough to remove the bacteria and germs, and that they can remain on their hands. And that's just the one component of it. And so when we look at a holistic hand hygiene perspective, we understand that there's a couple steps. One is using soap and water to lift and release the germs and bacteria from the hands. And then the second part of that is actually using proper hand drying, which is using a paper towel to provide the friction in order to remove that bacteria that we've lifted using that soap and water. So using a paper towel is critical in that process in actually drying your hands. Conversely, when we look at the jet air dryers, we know that the inner surface of a jet air dryer can harbor 48 times more bacteria than found on a toilet seat. And they do not provide that friction in order for us to remove those bacteria as well as a paper towel. And we have a lot of organizations to help us back up, the importance of paper towels. The WHO is one of them, and so we know that paper towels can remove up to 70%, 77% of the bacteria that remains on your hands after washing. And then the other side of that, which we've talked about before, is faced with the choice of the drying method. 2/3 of people prefer paper towels over jet air dryers. All right, so I love this tagline: jams are for toast, not for dispensers. So we know that hand washing is critically important. We know that when we do wash our hands and look at hand hygiene, a lot of it is done unconsciously. And so we need to really maximize our efforts and maximize the efforts of the students or the teachers or anybody in that facility. We need to give them all the opportunity to ensure that they have the best chance of staying healthy. And a lot of that comes through the products that Kimberly-Clark provides. First being dispensers. Jam-free guarantee, which means you're going to get to the product and it's going to provide you with a paper towel every single time. It's got one of the longest battery lives in the market at 150,000 dispensers per set of battery. Hands-free dispensing, which means it's hygienic. You don't have to touch the unit. Hidden towel or exposed towel. It fluctuates and is customizable. And then we have a lifetime guarantee on the product. So we know that, people sometimes are hard on dispensers and maybe they jam or whatever it is. The confidence that we can provide in the dispensers themselves can be through our lifetime warranties.
Travis, I think this one's key because one of the things that I hope I touched on in my presentation was things that irritate people when they go to the washroom. So high frequency things that are also high impact on that perception of clean. The top one was unflushed toilets. I can't help you with that. But I think the second one was dispensers that either aren't working or with no product in them. And so I think these elements that you talked about here are pretty critical as a result of that. In the off chance that you're getting someone who wants to dry their hands effectively rather than on their pants or not at all, the product just needs to be there and it needs to work. And I think this does that.
Absolutely. Yeah, excellent point. And people aren't as patient as they'd like to be. So if it's not working exactly like it's supposed to, they're going to move on to something that's likely less hygienic. So we know that the dispensers are important. We're going to provide a ton of quality there, but paired with the actual quality of the paper towel is going to offer a lot of benefits as well. So we can see here unmistakably Scott. So we've got some visible branding, preferred 4-to-1 on the actual towel itself versus the kind of the standard roll. 40% more feet per roll. So when we look at outages, when we look at making sure that the product is there, that it's not going to run out, high capacity systems are always better. Faster absorbency. So all Scott Pro hard roll towels have a faster absorbency versus the competition. This is very important in hand hygiene because, like I said, once those germs and bacteria are lifted from the soap, we want to get rid of it. And so it's going to, when it absorbs into that towel and the friction, that's how it's getting removed. As well, finally, the towel options to meet your needs. Scott Pro hard roll towels options including premium, whether premium quality is important to you, productivity, or even just the case price is going to dictate some of that decision making. We've got a ton of options available to make sure that we're finding the right solution for your facility.
Travis, I love it. And one of the things that I do want to hammer on, consider it an infomercial, if you will, is that unmistakably Scott stat that you got there that it's, preferred 4-to-1. Specifically in post-secondary, when we talked about those top 5 amenities that people are looking for, in that post-COVID environment, one of them is trusted brands, right, or brands that they recognize. And I think that's certainly true with things like chemicals or hand sanitizers, but it also can certainly play a role in things like hand towels, right? People want to feel confident that what they're using is good and it's safe, and I think we do that.
Absolutely.
All right, so with that, Travis, we are going to transition. Can you stick around, though, in case any questions come up at the end?
Absolutely, I'm here.
All right, thanks, Travis.
Thank you.
All right, next we are going to hear from Dr. Stephanie Martin. Stephanie has been with KC for, correct me if I'm wrong, Stephanie, 17 years last Monday. And she's going to cover a lot about cleaning, sanitizing, and disinfecting high-touch surfaces. So if you remember, if you were awake in the part of the session that I was giving about new expectations from a K-12 or even a post-secondary perspective, having things visible and visibly cleaning was a very important part of making people feel more comfortable. So Stephanie's going to walk through some tips and tricks to tell the difference between cleaning, sanitizing, disinfecting, and then I'll also offer up some tools on how we can get there. So Stephanie, I leave it up to you.
Thank you so much, Matt. So as we all know, the world has really forever changed when it comes to cleaning, sanitizing, and disinfecting. I think we see that everywhere we go, just this increased emphasis on what it means to create a hygienic space. And we think that Scott 24, which is the product I'm about to talk to you about, is really part of what could be a really winning solution in order to meet this need and this heightened expectation. So I'm going to show you some great things about Scott 24 that hopefully will answer lots of questions that you may have about cleaning, sanitizing, and disinfecting in general, and some unique product features. So let's dig into Scott 24. This is the first ever sanitizing wipe that actually sanitizes for 24 hours in spite of multiple touches. So that means that it is like the perfect product to use for what we would call high touch surfaces, things like door handles, elevator buttons, keyboards, desks. Think about all those things, particularly in schools that everyone has their hands over all the time. And that's what makes Scott 24 such a unique and cool product. So let's dig into the science behind Scott 24 and a little bit about this category in general, which is pre-saturated wipes. So there's a lot of confusion around what the difference is between cleaning and sanitizing and disinfecting. And I know I'm guilty of this. I just tend to use those terms all interchangeably, like they all mean the same thing, when actually they have really unique definitions that are in some cases regulated. So cleaning is where we're really just talking about physically removing germs, dirt, and soil from a surface. So we're not making any kill claims there. We're just literally saying we're just physically removing those things from a surface. However, sanitizing is where we actually start to talk about germs. So this is where we're saying we're going to lower the number of germs to what's considered a safe level for that surface. And it's also important to note that sanitizing claims can only be made about bacteria. So a really typical sanitizing claim would be something like kills 99.9% of bacteria. However, as soon as you start talking about viruses, you're talking about disinfecting. And disinfecting is like a higher level of clean than sanitization because we're talking about killing bacteria, we're talking about killing viruses, in some cases fungi. And it's also important to note that many disinfecting products, including Scott 24, make all three claims. So it's a cleaner, it's a sanitizer, and it's a disinfectant. But again, just keep in mind that if as soon as you start hearing the words viral kill, you're immediately talking about the disinfection portion of a product's claims.
So Stephanie, with that, can you say something disinfects for 24 hours?
You cannot. And actually, I'm going to probably give more of the American perspective on this just because I know it better. But that would be called something residually, that would be called residual surface disinfection. And currently, our United States EPA has just even recently considered this a possibility from a claims perspective. So the pathway forward to do that is currently being outlined. So as of right now, the only 24-hour claims that are being made are on bacteria. So it's not when you see a product with residual sanitization, it's not like it necessarily failed any big test. It's that pathway really didn't exist.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
No problem. And speaking of other types of wipes and other products, you may be wondering, okay, like here's some products that I may have more familiarity with, like Clorox or Lysol. What is it that makes Scott 24? What's similar? What's different? What differentiates Scott 24? So starting with the active ingredients, both Lysol and Clorox utilize a quaternary ammonium compound as their actives. And Scott does as well, but we also use hydrogen peroxide as an additional active ingredient. As far as being part of Health Canada's list of disinfectants for evidence for use against COVID-19, all three products would meet that standard. All would say that they kill 99.9% of bacteria in 15 seconds or less. But where Scott 24 is going to stand out is in this ability to make this a 24-hour kill of bacteria claim in spite of multiple touches. And that's called residual surface sanitization or residual self-sanitization. So I'm going to dig into that next and probably tell you more than you ever wanted to know about that claim. So we have this image here of a treated Scott 24 surface compared to an untreated Scott 24 surface. And this is a dramatization of using a typical wipe compared to a Scott 24 wipe. So what you see in residual surface sanitization, the benefit is that even after these multiple touches over 24 hours, it's really going to see a significant difference in the amount of bacteria on that surface due to that residual sanitization. So the way this claim is actually proven from an efficacy standpoint is that a surface is treated with a product like Scott 24, is anyone trying to make this claim, and that surface is then challenged with bacteria over a 24-hour period, all the while it's subjected to being wiped with wet abrasions as well as dry abrasions. So it's meant to simulate both this like wet touching and dry touching along with like repeated insults of bacteria to determine if you can continue to kill over that 24 hours. So it is in fact a 24-hour test. It is a test that actually is looking at making sure that surface is being touched and abraded in both wet and dry conditions. And if you meet that standard, then you are able to use this claim on your packaging and your label. And so Scott 24, as I mentioned before, we were the first ever pre-saturated wipe to meet the standard for residual surface sanitization, which makes it a really unique product. Now, a question you might get a lot is specific to COVID-19. So the question is can Scott 24 disinfect COVID-19? And I will say COVID-19 is the disease, SARS-CoV-2 is the virus that causes it. But again, people use those terms interchangeably. So it is part of Health Canada's list of disinfectants with evidence for use against COVID-19. It is right now in process of being reviewed by Health Canada for our specific SARS-CoV-2 data, and that claim was recently granted by the United States EPA as well. So we're just a little bit ahead of schedule on the US side in terms of having that claim approved. But as I said, it's in process of being reviewed right now with Health Canada. And as I said before, the 24-hour aspect of Scott 24 is a sanitization claim, just like Matt asked me about. So you're not going to see a 24-hour viral kill claim because that would be a disinfection. But sanitization is being able to make this claim against bacteria. So it functions as both a disinfectant that's approved on Health Canada's list for use against COVID-19, and it also has this residual bacterial kill quality.
Stephanie, can you explain or maybe peel the onion back a little bit on bullet point number 1, right? So what does it really mean when it says evidence for use against COVID-19? So what might they be looking at to say that?
That's a great question. So SARS-CoV-2, when this whole pandemic started a year ago, part of what makes everyone freak out and make something a pandemic is that this is a new to the world organism. So no one had ever seen this organism before, which is why nobody had immunity to it and why we've seen just a catastrophic, global response, right? So because no one actually had seen this organism before, of course, no one actually has data against SARS-CoV-2 specifically because we didn't know it existed, right? So you'll see that when we have a product like in a canister form, whatever, there's a list of claims on the back about organisms that you've tested against. And so no company would have had any ability to test against SARS-CoV-2 prior to this global pandemic. However, SARS-CoV-2 is a type of coronavirus, and if many companies had claims against coronaviruses, including Scott 24. So a lot of inclusion on these lists, like Health Canada's list in the United States, we have a similar list called List N. Inclusion on those types of lists was typically based on your existing efficacy claims, like, for example, being able to kill a coronavirus or being able to kill something harder than that. Because the idea is like, if you can kill a harder pathogen, then likely you could kill something easier. So that initially was the basis. And now, as people have the opportunity with some new microbiological labs offering the chance to test specifically against SARS-CoV-2, now people are trying to generate that data and then also submit to regulatory bodies like Health Canada in order to be able to put that organism wording on their packaging.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
Permission to move
yeah,
forward?
Absolutely. So that's a great segue into actually exactly what I was talking about. So I just mentioned this. I know this is a United States thing, our EPA Master Label, but I did just want to mention it as a kind of a cool resource. There's limited real estate on a package for all the words that you could say in terms of like places you could use it, compatibility with surfaces and stuff. So it's their master label that we have on file with the United States government has some tables of those kinds of things. And it can just be a good resource if you're like, hey, I'm not quite sure if I could use it here or there. There's like lists of types of surfaces that could be included in sort of this non-porous surface disinfection or the residual sanitization claim. And then as far as how to use Scott 24, there are several different claim areas within our product. As I mentioned, we clean, we sanitize, we disinfect, right? So we have a very rapid sanitization of bacteria that happens within about 15 seconds. So that's just, again, the sanitization is a 99.9% of bacteria. It's very quick. Then we have a surface disinfection claim, which again, because disinfection includes viruses and bacteria, this is where you see our viral organism list. So again, coronavirus, as I just talked about, we kill influenza, RSV, a number of bacteria. And then, as I mentioned, the SARS-CoV-2 has just been recently approved by the United States EPA, and then we're in process of that being reviewed with Health Canada at the moment. And then we have this residual surface sanitization, which has a 5-minute contact time. And that is going to, again, cover killing 99.9% of bacteria for 24 hours in spite of those multiple touches.
So one of the questions that I get often is around the time it needs to be wet on the surface, and some people saying, well, it doesn't look wet
Sure.
after 2 minutes, so how is it going to be wet after 6? Do I need to keep wiping it down? Can you
Yeah.
kind of walk us through some of that science?
Gosh, that's such a good question. Yeah, so I think it's a little bit of a murky area because the way that efficacy testing is carried out in order to prove these claims actually does not involve reapplication of the product. So there's a protocol that's followed where a surface is treated, and what is written out in the protocol is it's spoken of as more of a do not disturb, like leave the you apply to a standard of visible wetness most certainly. So you want to make sure that surface is good and wet with the product when it's applied, and then the protocol calls for to leave it undisturbed, and then the rest of the testing is carried out. So I do understand that it's a confusing area because the way the directions are written, it makes you feel like, well, maybe I have to continue to keep wiping, and I need 50 wipes. And I know Lysol and Clorox, they also have longer contact times too, like 4 minutes. So I think certainly what's happening perhaps at a microscopic level, especially with, again, the way the efficacy test is proven, doesn't involve constant reapplication. I know PDI, if you're familiar with that company, they've put out a paper within like a trade organization magazine saying that their belief is that the way the efficacy is proven, as long as you maintain that standard of visible wetness during application, that they feel like it's more of a do not disturb, kind of leave it unperturbed, and then you can be assured that the efficacy is there given of how the testing is conducted.
Okay. All right.
So another question that you may have is about a residue. Does Scott 24 leave a residue? And the answer is yes. That's how the product actually works, is that it contains a quaternary ammonium compound that's sort of left in a polymeric form on a surface. And that's what allows for that protection of that surface for 24 hours against bacteria. And so because of this, we definitely would not recommend that you use it on flooring, and just in case it presents any kind of a slip hazard. And then we also would not recommend it being used on surfaces that are highly transparent or highly reflective, just from an aesthetic perspective. But then again, at Kimberly-Clark, for example, we have these like glass doors that have the metal handles, and certainly I would use Scott 24 on metal handles, but probably not on the glass because the handle is what people are really touching anyway. So just use that as an example of how you might think about utilizing the product when you have situations like that, where you have aesthetics, but like, are those the things that people are really touching or not?
So one of the other questions we get is, hey, if this is going to be, used in a school, whether it's K to 12 or even post-secondary, and someone has wiped down that desk or that table, and I put my apple on it,
Yeah.
am I good to go without hurting
So,
myself?
so technically the product is not for food contact. So it's not for food contact, and it's not meant to be used, for example, in like critical care patient, like, you would never want to wipe down a person with Scott 24. But if there was any concern, simply you could, like a lot of products, this is actually a pre-saturated wipe. Many disinfectant wipes have this like not for food contact. So I would say if you're already doing this with Clorox or Lysol, because they have the same verbiage on the back of the package about not being for food contact, but you could maybe rinse with water first, or you could just have a napkin. Certainly, I think like a short amount of time, it's hard to imagine that it would transfer to your apple. But if the product were wet, again, you'd sort of be messing with the whole do not disturb, and then you'd also have more of a chance, obviously, of having that chemical transfer to that item. And again, this would be true for any, I think, type of disinfectant pre-sat wipe.
So give it its dwell time and
Yeah,
don't
let
be
it.
rinsing your
Yeah, if
apple
it's good
with
and
the wipe.
dry. Yeah, right. And if you had any concern at all, you can always just like wipe it with a little bit of water.
Cool. Okay.
And then another question that might come up is, do you need to use gloves when using Scott 24? So the product does contain hydrogen peroxide, which for certain people can cause this like skin blanching issue. So just, it doesn't happen to everyone, but some people get like these little white dots on their fingers or something if they expose themselves to hydrogen peroxide. It's harmless. It's, again, temporary, but you may notice that, and it's just nothing to be alarmed about. But by and large, there's no requirement to wear gloves from a safety perspective. Now, we'll say, like, anytime we're cleaning, we're dealing potentially with pathogens and that sort of things, there's other reasons to wear gloves that might just make good common sense. But from a product safety perspective, the gloves would be more protecting you against the pathogens that you're cleaning versus the wipe itself, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Oh, one of my favorites. Okay, so I've spent a ton of time talking about the actual formulation, which I should also have said is invented by Kimberly-Clark, by Kimberly-Clark scientists, and I'm super proud of that. It's actually, our patents were just issued, and just honestly a really amazing piece of technological innovation. But at Kimberly-Clark, we also have very amazing, nerdy material scientists who make amazing materials. And part of what makes Scott 24 a really great product is not just the formulation, but the material that's keeping that formulation. So this is made on our proprietary meltblown base sheet. One of the things that's great about meltblown is that it actually almost has like a microfiber-like cleaning experience. You're going to find that the wipe actually does quite a good job of cleaning surfaces. The other thing is that it's really good at absorbing our solution. So I don't know if you can tell in this little picture, it almost looks like a flower, like it's called a bond pattern. And that bond pattern is like very intentional in how it picks up that formulation and also how it releases it. So that's called controlled liquid release. And that means that you're going to get a really even application of that formulation to a surface, and it's not going to like all come out in the beginning. So how that really translates is that you should be able to get pretty good coverage of a surface with the wipe just because of all these materials properties. And then just to close up, I just want to kind of wrap up with everything that I said about Scott 24, and then just also give you some thoughts on where I think we are just at this stage in our pandemic. So just a reminder, as I said, we were recently approved by the United States EPA for our SARS-CoV-2 COVID-19 kill claim, and that claim is in the review process in Health Canada presently. It's also the first pre-saturated wipe with a residual residual sanitization claim, which means we can kill bacteria, 99.9% of bacteria for up to 24 hours. Also, Scott is one of the world's most trusted brands. So, we think that hopefully you've had great experiences with the Scott brand in the past, and the same trust that you would put in our other products, you would have trust in this product as well. Again, cleaning, sanitizing, disinfecting, it does all three in addition to this really unique residual sanitization claim I've talked about. And again, we're part of these lists such as the Health Canada list of disinfectants with evidence for use against COVID-19. So I just wanted to close by saying that I know as we come to the end of this pandemic, you may be asking yourself, like, how do I get out of this this place we're at right now where it's almost like this expectation that we are cleaning nonstop. And there's like, it's almost impossible to think about how we could clean every surface of every object, all day long. It's just not realistic, right? And I think especially with schools and with children, I'm a mom, and I think about just even articles I read about how much now our kids are being exposed to cleaners, and just it's happening so frequently that, I think it's probably gives people pause of wondering, like, how long can we really continue this? So what I would say is that I think Scott 24 is a really excellent product to give something that we like to call confidence between cleans, right? So you may have some procedural clean that you're doing. Maybe it's after school, maybe it's, at night, or something that happens to sort of reset a room between one day and the next. And as of right now, there's really no product out there that's like extending the life of what you just did, right? Like you spent all this time cleaning, disinfecting, sanitizing, and there's nothing to sort of like seal that area until the next time you can do that in depth of a cleaning. And what Scott 24 is really trying to do is bridge that gap between that really deep, powerful clean and sanitizing, disinfecting, and help give you that confidence between when you can do that and the next time. So again, I think it's actually like a really perfect product to try to help us move away from, like, we know we can't use 8,000 wipes a day to clean everything, but maybe what we can do is make our current level of our current procedural cleans last a little bit longer and give us that confidence to help us figure out how to navigate the next part of sort of this re-entry into society. So as you can tell, I love talking about Scott 24, and Matt, I just thank you so much for the opportunity to give people some more insight into the product.
No problem. It is I who thank you, Dr. Martin, and I will just add two things. Again, when we talked about expectations coming out of COVID-19 and what types of things would make people more comfortable, one of the key things from a K to 12 perspective, if you remember, was making sure that signage is available, right? So people know what the procedures are, they know what the processes are. So what I would tell you is we do have tools to help communicate that Scott 24 is in use in any type of facility. And then the second thing is from a post-secondary perspective, one of the key things that came out was brands and having strong brands being used in that facility so people know that they can trust what's being used and that it works. And so I think this helps, whether it's K to 12 or on that post-secondary side on both pieces too. Okay, moving on to our last section of the day. We've had a little bit of science and we're going to get a little bit more. For those of you who have been paying attention, our last guest has changed. It is no longer Chrissy Schertz, but in fact it is Mark Bushy. Mark is a key component of our respirator and mask team, specifically in the development of the launch of that category for us this year. Mark, how long have you been with KC for, give or take?
8 years.
8 years. Very good. So what I will do now is turn it over to you.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Matt, for this opportunity, and thank you all. One of the great things that we wanted to talk about, and Matt alluded to this, is we spent a lot of time within the mask and respirator business, especially over the last 12 months or so. One of the biggest differences that we see in the market is just a common misunderstanding of the difference between what is a face mask and what is a respirator, right? And we thought it was important to at least highlight that difference here, just to make sure. A lot of times those names get interchanged in the market, and we wanted to make sure it was very clear. So starting off, we'll start with the face mask. The primary purpose of a face mask is really to be source control. And what that means is it's actually capturing respiratory droplets. So again, this is keeping basically you to yourself. So you can think about respiratory particles coming out. The mask basically serves as a barrier to ensure those don't get out into the environment more widely. Other terms that you hear in the market for that are just face mask, disposable mask, or surgical or procedural mask, right? And even though those may mean subtle things, a lot of times, again, those terms can get used interchangeably. What we saw is a very dynamic shift in this marketplace. For a long time in North America, this marketplace didn't really exist, at least with any sort of velocity. And what we've ended up seeing is that this market really is dominated by a lot of very high levels of non-branded imported products. There was a lot of product that flooded the market. And where that is different, right, and is really when it comes to a respirator, right? Respirators are truly personal protective equipment, or PPE. And what this is designed, it's designed to protect the wearer against particulates. So that is particulates that are in the air. The other terms that get tossed around for a respirator, N95 is a version of a respirator, same thing with a filtering face piece. When we look at this dynamic, what has ultimately happened is we've seen that the respirator product has largely been diverted to healthcare, especially as of late with the pandemic happening. We also saw really a high influx of KN95s, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a second, to really satisfy some of this need for an overall respirator. And so what we saw this landscape shift, but at the end of the day, a respirator, the thing to keep in mind is this truly is protecting the person, and it's PPE, which is a little bit different from the source control that obviously goes with more of that general purpose face mask. So I just touched on it a little bit in terms of the difference between kind of a respirator and a KN95. So we'd like to take an opportunity to do a little bit more of a deep dive into actually some of the differences between these two models. So we'll start on the left with a industrial N95, the product that we largely are talking about today. That is governed by NIOSH. So that really goes through that's the regulating body, and it actually is the testing standard that these respirators are tested against. It's a US based standard. And really anytime you see a NIOSH approved N95, right, that tends to be the gold standard when it comes to respirators. Like we mentioned in the last slide, really the hazard that we're up against is dry particulates in the environment, right? And we're really trying to help the wearer keep those particles out. And so that's really the kind of the industrial N95 bucket. KN95s, in all honesty, in a lot of ways, there's a lot of similarities, but probably one of the biggest difference is unlike our industrial N95 tested against NIOSH, KN95s are ultimately tested against a Chinese standard. And a lot of times these are actually, while there are some that are made in the USA, the vast majority of KN95s are in fact imported. And while they do serve as kind of a respirator, there are some very distinct differences, between the industrial N95 approved by NIOSH and a KN95. Most notably, one of the things you'll find to be most common is ear loops, right? And what ends up happening a lot of times today, NIOSH does not approve any sort of respirator with ear loops. That is because in order for a respirator to truly function the way it should, it requires a very tight facial seal. And so far, NIOSH has found that the head strap and headbands is the way to ultimately accomplish that. So that is one of the most visual differences that you can see with a KN95. The vast majority do have ear loops. The other big difference that you'll see is really just, these things come in a variety of shapes and sizes, but at the end of the day, it really comes down to a lot of the markings on the actual respirator. One of the gold standards with NIOSH is it actually requires some select information to get printed on the respirator that says NIOSH N95. KN95s likewise will have similar markings, but denoting the KN95. So that's another visual tell that you can see to kind of tell the difference between the two. So really, you may be asking, right? We just delineated between a face mask and a respirator, between a respirator and a KN95. So what ultimately makes our product, the KIMTECH N95, a little bit different? And really, this is designed with intention, and it's different by design. You'll notice the style on the left is unique, and it's unique on purpose. One of the things that we actually do, as kind of table stakes in this game, is we need to make sure in order to pass NIOSH, that it passes a filtration efficiency of at least 95% for 0.3 micron particles, which we certainly do. And the way we ultimately do that is through proprietary materials and vertical integration. So what does that mean? We as Kimberly-Clark have a lot of expertise in these non-woven materials, things that go into some of our products like diapers as a perfect example. We actually make a lot of the spun bond and meltblown, the raw materials that go into the respirator, ourselves. So that comes, we ultimately get to oversee that overall process, and we get to ultimately manage that whole from the time the raw materials made the whole way to kind of finished product production. That's within Kimberly-Clark control. So a really, really strong thing that we have, and a big differentiator against some of our competitors.
Mark, just on that, you taught me this, right? So I cut one of these respirators open, and it's kind of tough to see, but I see 4 layers in there. Is that the meltblown that you were talking about before?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, 4 layers is exactly right. So on the 2 outer layers are actually a spun bond layer, which gives it really kind of some strength. But when we talk about kind of what the workhorse is, if you will, of the overall respirator, really is the meltblown. That serves as the filtration layers in the middle. And to your point, yeah, when you cut it open, you do see that we have 2 layers of meltblown there, which actually gives us that particle filtration of 95%.
Cool. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, the other great thing, that comes inherently with some of our proprietary materials and this technology, we're able to design and have a lightweight material that actually tends to be more breathable than a lot of the leading competitors in the market. In fact, when we look against our breathability against one of the leading respirator styles out there from a competitor, we're actually 31% more breathable. So you may be asking, why does that matter? As you can imagine, when you were wearing respirators for a period of time, it can get could get somewhat uncomfortable as it's on your face. And I think the really breathability comes into play here, and ultimately it drives a more comfortable experience as it's on your face. And so I think this is really a huge differentiator for us, and something we're really, really proud of. And obviously, like we said, the proprietary technology is ultimately what allows us to make that claim about breathability. The other great thing that makes our respirators a little bit different is really our head straps. So this material is unique, and it's unique again by design. This, like the rest of our raw materials, is a Kimberly-Clark patented material, and this material is very unique in that it has softness, strength, and stretch, and that's a really unique combination of properties. But we feel really great about this. A lot of our competitors in the market kind of have that harder rubber feeling head strap, and so we feel like this actually will give us a more comfortable wear using our own material here. So something, again, we're very, very proud of to integrate into our respirator. The last thing, which is very important when we talk about respirators, is really to make sure we're driving the right fit and seal. And one of the ways we do that is with an adjustable nose piece, right? And everyone's face shape and size is different. So it's really important that you can adjust the nose piece in order to get and drive some of that facial seal. So the nose piece is very inherent to our overall design and very important to drive that. A couple other great things I will mention with this respirator, right? We proudly have our manufacturing footprint in the USA. Like we talked about in some previous slides, we are NIOSH approved, and for your reference, the TC number is there, which is kind of the marking standard that is used with NIOSH. And another great thing that we have as part of our overall proposition, which really separates us, is we actually this respirator is part of our Right Cycle program, which is a sustainability platform that allows us to divert these away from a landfill and get them turned into other reusable goods. So, I know for me, as an example, if I'm walking to the grocery store, it drives me crazy when I see, masks and respirators on the ground. Just knowing that we have a differentiated solution that we can actually keep these things out of a landfill, is a great thing and something we're super, super proud of. So a really good, compelling story here with our respirator, and hopefully, you and your customers will find the same.
Awesome. Well, Mark, that was absolutely marvelous. Thank you. And with that, hopefully you or Chrissy can stick around for some Q&A at the end of the session.
Certainly. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, folks, we have done it. That was a lot of science and hopefully a lot of information that you found helpful in a little bit of time. As a recap from our Schools In session, really moving from left to right here, some things I'm hoping you're taking away today, and that's some of the most important signals and amenities to the students, the visitors, and the staff at your school to help them feel that where they are is clean and hygienic. Number two, paper towels are a very important part of the hand hygiene process. Number three, there are a lot of high-touch surfaces that you can protect yourself against, and I think we've delivered some of the tools that can help you do that. And then finally, in market, just a lot of questions or concerns about masks versus respirators and what they really do. So hopefully we helped you understand a little bit of that as well. So without further ado, I will say thank you and then open up to any questions or concerns that you've got so we can help. Thank you.